Two cars produced almost 10 years apart on opposite sides of the world, yet somehow, despite these differences, are actually very similar. On this episode of Eat, Sleep, Drive, we're going to take the E92 M3 and the Mustang GT350 for a spin and talk about just how similar they are. Welcome everyone to another episode of Eat, Sleep, Drive. Now we have two cars here from very different sides of the world, a Ford, a BMW. This is a very unlikely comparison, but they're actually a lot closer than you would think. Now, despite the Ford being from 2016 and the BMW being from 2008, and they are front engine rear-wheel drive, those are the obvious things, but they both have V8 engines that rev past 8,000 RPM. A very nice touch. They also have electronic damping control. That was something that this car was a very early adopter of. And they're both within 2 inches of wheelbase and within 200 pounds of curb weight. So on paper, they are actually pretty similar. But how does that translate to driving dynamics? Well, we're gonna find out. Let's start with the E92 M3. Okay, here we go. The E92 M3. We're gonna take a little road called Pond Run, which is in the Cincinnati area. A little bit tight, but there's usually not too much traffic here. See how she do. So the first thing that we obviously have to talk about with both these cars are the engines. As I go into M mode, M dynamic mode. This car has a 4-liter V8, revs past 8,000 RPM, and hey, guess what? The GT350 has a 5.2 liter V8 that revs past 8,000 RPM. So high revving V8s, and they fundamentally have a very similar character. They don't have a lot of low end torque, and that is something that this car is desperately lacking. Even though the GT350 doesn't have low end torque, it just makes more power in general. So it has less low end torque than, power, but it still has more than this car. And, I never thought I'd say like an E92 M3 is slow, because it's not. It's still a properly quick car, but man, we've really gotten into these like horsepower wars where it's not that like surprising anymore, or it's not that like amazing anymore. But what I do really like about this engine, because it fundamentally really can hold its own. It's just we've just kind of got into these ridiculous numbers with Hellcats and stuff like that. What's cool about this engine is that it feels more like Formula One inspired. Being that it's a BMW, oh my goodness, that was a rough bump. Being that it's a BMW, the engine is so smooth. Like, they're known for their straight sixes, which are nothing short of silky smooth. And this is a V8, so you'd say, well, is this one going to be a little more rough? Not at all. Super smooth as we rev it all the way out, and it just puts a smile on your face. We're going uphill, by the way, so, toge runs are more fun uphill anyway, because you get to be on throttle more. But so yeah, it's more Formula One inspired. The Mustang GT350 V8 is unbelievable. I love the sound it makes. This one is just more refined. I mean, as you're gonna see, that's kind of a theme with these cars, rather unsurprisingly. The BMW just has more refinement than the GT350, which, the engine is kind of the first thing in that regard. Couple the engine with the transmission. Both transmissions are pretty good, but there's like really one, I'll say like shortcoming of the GT350, and that's that the transmission gearing is a little too long. The gearing in this car is perfect. It's a little more mated to, or it's a little better mated to an engine that is high revving like this one and lacks low end torque, because it just like gets up and goes better because it's geared lower. As opposed to GT350, you're doing damn near 60 miles an hour in first gear. There's not a lot of shifting going on. You're kind of usually can get yourself caught out of the power band in the GT350, where you can't in this one. And one thing I'll talk about more on the GT350 is just the fact that the shifter in this car is rubbery, and the one in the GT350 is significantly better. As we turn around here and go back downhill, it's just like, it's a typical BMW shifter. Every single BMW I've driven with a manual transmission feels exactly the same. It's just rubbery. It's not precise. So I don't know, take your pick with the two. One has better gearing, but one has a better shifter. So that one's sort of a toss up there. And once again, we'll talk more about the GT350 shifter once we get there, and the transmission. As far as dynamics go, gosh, this car is good. I mean, both cars are really good. They both turn in exceptionally well. This car's on Nitto NTO1s, which are stupid sticky, so it's kind of got an advantage there. But one thing I will say in the handling department, both have incredible steering, but the BMW has a little more, it's a little more progressive. I'm totally in the wrong gear here. It's a little more progressive. It doesn't break away as quickly. The GT350 is all like grip, 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 and it's gone. It's actually, the GT350 is actually a really hard car to drift, believe it or not. It's a really hard car to keep sliding, basically. Where as opposed to this car is more progressive, is super well balanced, and lets you really kind of like hang the tail out without getting like really out of shape. So I definitely like that. The cars are kind of, the GT350 is based a little more built on a like sports car platform, even though it's a muscle car. It's a little more purpose built as a sports car, whereas obviously the M3 is based on a sort of coupe sedan, more, you know, just regular 3 Series. But even though that's the case, the Mustang makes some sacrifices in the form of comfort just to be able to sell to most of their audience in the same way that the 3 Series does, like fundamentally in design. So what you get is, with these cars, a hotted up version, of course. So this car has a carbon fiber roof. It's, you know, it's trying to do things to save weight in very crucial areas. The Mustang GT350 has also some composite materials I'll talk about as well. So they're kind of very similar in that regard, in that they're, you know, hotted up versions of lesser cars. And I mean that in the best way possible, Mustang fans. Once again, a Mustang is a great, great car, but it does appeal to a lot of older buyers and does make some compromises. It's not as totally purpose built as something like a Corvette or something like that. The last thing I'll say, probably in regards to the M3, is just that when it comes to dimensions, this car actually has a longer wheelbase than the Mustang, which is quite surprising because the Mustang is known as being a pretty big car. The Mustang is 4 inches wider, however, and where you really feel that are on roads like this that are pretty narrow. But in general, even though this car has a bigger wheelbase and stuff, you park them next to each other and dimensionally they're so close overall, and yet this car feels so much smaller to drive once you're in it, once you're going. It's really uncanny. I think a lot of that has to do with the hood line. The hood line in GT350 is super high, so once again kind of gives it this feeling of being bigger than maybe it really is. And this car just kind of shrinks around you. There was a lot of critics when this car came out that it was too big. You know, the E92 M3 was the perfect size and all these things. But this car really shrinks around you, and it does, even though dimensionally they are almost identical, it does in fact feel a lot smaller than the GT350. So we've hit a road closure, which is a perfect time to end the E92 M3 content. So let's pop in the GT350. Okay, we've done the E90 M3. It is now time for none other than the Mustang GT350. Starting with the engine. Really, both these cars are unbelievable in the engine department. And the funny part about this car compared to the E92 is that their power bands are exactly the same. At low RPM, even though it's a V8, there's really not anybody home. And yet, when you get into the upper RPMs, like I will now, it just comes alive. Guys, that was only 5,500 RPM. I still had 2,500 RPM to go. I mean, both cars are fast, but the GT350 takes it to a whole new level. Now, you have 10 years of development, you have 10 years of technology, but you also have 1.2 liters additional extra in the displacement category. This car just puts you back in your seat like not many cars do. And while I love the exhaust note of the E92 M3, this one is just different. I'm not gonna say one's better than the other, but this one is more raucous. It's more brutal, it's more raw. That flat plane crank V8 just has a sound of its own. Woo! Now, as I hit that big bump, just like I did last time, this car handles it a little bit better. Both have electronic damping control, which is great, but the magnetic ride, or the Magna ride, in the GT350 is next level. But both of them make a big difference, like when you have EDC on or off in both cars. It's actually surprising. It's funny driving these cars back to back. The tactile points are very similar. The steerings are very similar. I think the E90 maybe has slightly more feel to it. It is, after all, hydraulic. This one has slightly better braking feel, although both of them have a very firm pedal and stop well, but the GT350 just has so much more initial bite. I mean, guys, look at the brakes on these things, man. They're huge. They're absolutely huge compared to what we saw on the E92 M3. The E92 M3 ones are adequate. However, they are nowhere near as, have as much stopping power as these. While we're talking about suspension and stuff like that, and steering, I think even though the steering feel is very similar, the shape of the wheel is very different, just in its design and also size. The Mustang, this feels like a very big steering wheel compared to the E92 M3. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I'll put them in the, I'll overlay them right now if I can find them online. So I definitely like the E90 steering wheel more, not only just the diameter, but more specifically like all these buttons and the design. The Mustang steering wheel just seems a little bit cheap and kind of gives you more of the feeling of its just kind of regular plain Jane Mustang roots. As we turn around here to head back downhill, just as we did in the E92, I think that kind of those steering wheel comments lead way to, you know, kind of the overall build quality and stuff. It's no surprise that the BMW feels better built, and also the interior just feels, the E92 has more of an X factor to it from a specialness, despite this car being more fun, I think, just because it's faster and slightly more dynamic. That car has just, it's just an X factor. It's something that you can't put on it, and it has to do with the fit and finish of the materials, the way the door opens and closes, just tactile points that you can't really quantify. The BMW does a little bit better. But with that said, what's unbelievable about the GT350, which way do I want to go here? I think last time I went the wrong way and I went that way. let's go this way. The GT350, I think the biggest compliment to this car is the fact that in everything that it does in driving, it feels European. I've driven a lot of Mustangs, a lot of muscle cars. This doesn't feel like any of them. They did so much stuff under the covers over your standard GT that this car truly does feel European, which once again is about the biggest compliment you can give a Mustang. And in that regard, they are very similar with how they go out, go about their business and how they drive. As I mentioned, the E90 is a little more progressive. This car is a little more agile, but definitely makes, let's go right. I don't know where I'm going, guys, I'm lost. Where I'm lacking or wishing that I was in the E92 is strictly in size right now, because both cars are incredibly fun, but this one, 4 inches wider on a road that is already super narrow, makes a big difference. And wider is nicer for more grip, putting more tire under the car, more grip in the handling department. But when you're on small roads, it's kind of a bummer. On a track, it would be absolutely no problem at all. And gosh, this road is horrible. Once again, it would be no problem at all on a track, but in little, what the UK would call B roads, although I'm sure these roads are massive compared to UK B roads, this car just feels a little bit too big. Once again, brakes. Oh my gosh. As I died, this road is just the worst thing I've ever been on. Oh my gosh, how did I end up here? Once again, I think they are really more similar than people would be willing to admit. The E92 was compared a little bit to the Mustang GT track pack, the regular GT, not the GT350. And, I think when it was out, but ultimately, we kind of shared some of the same things, but I think the E92 still kind of won that comparison. Now it's like they're close. They're still like, this one feels more like the M3 does in its Europeanness. The only difference being this is just infinitely faster. Keep in mind, this car has an E85 tune, so it's got, 50 more horsepower even, but stock for stock regardless, 1.2 liters of displacement, 10 years of technology, this car is just faster. And I don't want to get into, as I think of like wrapping this video up, I'm not trying to say one is better than the other, but what I really wanted to accomplish out of this video was to show you guys how similar these cars really actually are. And it's more just down to flavors. Obviously, one is a lot more expensive than the other right now just because it's newer. The GT350 is quite a bit more expensive than, you can pick up a used E92 M3. But I mean, as these cars both age, I think they will be compared more. Like I said, they're not directly comparable now just because of the price gap, but if you like the E92 M3, you will love the GT350. If you like the GT350, you will love the E92 M3. They're just very similar, very rewarding cars to drive. And once again, I think this is a big compliment to the Mustang, which has always been traditionally a pony car. A lot of people just think of it as just this brute force muscle car, but this car has finesse. It has the same finesse that the E92 has, but you can't go wrong with either one. Once again, it just goes back to flavor. Do you want something that is a little more refined, a little slightly better highway cruiser? It's hard to go wrong with the German car, even though this one is just great on the highway as well. One thing I forgot to mention, and I think I alluded to it in the E92, is this shifter is awesome. very notchy, but in the best way possible. You kind of gotta be a man about it. Like you kind of got to throw it around, but it responds so well. You always know what gear you're in. You always know what gear you're going to. It's not that rubbery mess that is the E92 M3, or basically any M3 I've ever driven, to be honest, in the manual department. So what's your flavor, man? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you want raw power? Do you want to go as fast as you can? It's got to be the Mustang GT350. This car is stupid fast on a back road. MR damper is doing its job. The E92 can certainly hold its own in the performance category, but it's just not to this level. Once again, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. I think these cars are really, really quite similar. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm super fortunate to be able to own both of these, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, what you like about each one. Once again, I'm not trying to make this which one's better, blah, 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 get all the fanboys involved. If you want to follow me in between episodes, check me out on Instagram. I have some mods planned for the E92 M3. We're going to be doing some exhaust mods, a little bit of tuning to get that car a little more power and hopefully a little bit closer to what this is like, just kind of being on the ragged edge. But yeah, stick around if you guys enjoyed E92 or GT350 content. I also have the BRZ project going on, plenty of stuff going on. Appreciate you guys watching as always, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Eat, Sleep, Drive. See ya.